Namaste. Today we will be looking at Kushti, which is an Indian form of folk wrestling that has been around in one form or another for the last 5,000 years. The matches generally have no time limit and no point system, but roughly follow the same rules as catch wrestling. You can win by pin, submission, or knockout, just no strikes. The athletes compete and train in just a loincloth and roll around in the dirt together. So to my mind, it's one of the gayest forms of wrestling out there, with the exception of the oiled up Turks and me when I do no gi. I've had a couple of requests to speak about the physical training that these wrestlers perform, so let's get into it. My biggest observation in researching this video is that the surroundings you find yourself in is always one of the most powerful influences you have on your program. It's fair to say that India 5,000 years ago was very poor and had no fitness equipment or facilities, and that's probably still true today once you get outside of the financial hubs, despite the economic growth in India. And when you find yourself in that situation, you tend to train with just what you have, which is primarily your own body weight and that of your partners. They do a bunch of carries, rope climbs, jumps, calisthenics like Hindu squats and push-ups. It's literally named after these motherfuckers. And I think they actually get a lot of general fitness work through maintaining their facility with things like digging up the pit and smoothing out the dirt, especially when they start adding extra people to the sled device that they use for that. I find it interesting that they perform so many similar exercises or activities to other grappling cultures and codes that I've talked about before on this channel. They do rope climbs, high rep curls, upper back and shoulder work. They place an emphasis on grip. They even do band work. Is that because they've stolen it from other grappling codes, or that these things just work and they've independently stumbled upon these answers over time? Given how traditional the sport still is, I would guess it's the latter rather than the former. What's less than ideal about their training? Well, pretty much all of their training is low load and insanely high reps. And that makes sense when you consider the combination of the access to equipment, because one of the limited ways that you have to progress when you have no equipment is just by doing more and more and more. A second thing you have to consider is that matches can last up to an hour in length, and you might have to compete in multiple matches at a tournament. And given the choice, I think you would pick being slower and less powerful if it means having the gas tank to handle those demands. However, the fact remains that max strength, especially in upper body pulling, has near universal value to all forms of grappling, and that isn't built with low load, high rep training. Quite the opposite, in fact. With regard to lower body explosive strength, I think there's probably no elasticity demand to Indian wrestling because of the soft nature of the floor. But max strength and power would still be extremely useful for things like takedowns once we've got a connection to an opponent. And there's no amount of Hindu squats that can develop that, in my opinion. You need to lift heavy and fast and maintain high outputs through lower reps and longer rest periods. And we just don't see that in their training. Also, this is just an observation, but Indian wrestlers appear to be less muscular and with a high level of body fat than their counterparts in other grappling arts, even in the heavier weight classes. Is it diet, culture, genes, training, access to drugs? Who knows, but this trend appears fairly unique to mud wrestling rather than Olympic wrestling. So perhaps freestyle and Greco in India have benefited from a greater exposure to and adoption of training methods from abroad. Either way, this was a fascinating study. Jai Ho.